Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey Mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
Yo and hello everybody. Like my dad said, Mike here. Welcome to Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. Again, it's mid-June. The National is getting closer. I am super excited about it. We're about 6 weeks away, I guess. Something that sounds about right. And yeah, it couldn't get here faster. I'm looking forward to it. I am really curious. I was thinking as I was listening to my dad's intro, I wonder how many of you guys still listen to the intro, or if you just on your podcast, if you're listening, or if you're watching on YouTube, you know it's about a minute long and you hit twice on the fast forward 30 seconds. I wonder how many people do that, or they just suffer through it because it's just part of the show. But welcome to another episode. I wanted to share with you guys, obviously I didn't do an episode last week, and that was because I was literally not just out of town, I was out of the country. I went to Quito, Ecuador, which is the capital of Ecuador, right on the equator, and did a mission trip down there, serving through my church with a bunch of young adults. They're early 20-somethings. My daughter was included in that. My wife and I did that. We led the team down there with another older seasoned adult couple is probably the better way to put it. So it was really great. Had several people that had never done that before, never been out of the country before. And to, see them experience that is pretty special, I have to admit. In fact, it's probably my favorite thing about going to a mission trip, besides the serving part, is seeing and sharing that kind of just experience with those kids, these young adults. It was pretty great. It was actually my 6th time to Ecuador overall in the last 10 years is when I started doing mission trips. That was my 18th trip that I've done in 10 years. So I had essentially 2.5 years that I didn't do any because of COVID, but now finally being able to start doing these again is so rewarding and so awesome. And it's just a major staple in my life, something really important to me. And so that's why I didn't do an episode last week. So hopefully you'll forgive me and be listening this week to what I am super excited about this week's episode, because it is something that I think I kind of threw out the idea in passing during an episode. Our guest will remind me, I'm sure, of where he heard this idea, but he took the ball and ran. And he's a good friend of mine. I want to bring him on right now, and we're just going to start getting into this. It is the kind of debut, so to speak, of the data surrounding a concept that we call the Vintage 100 Index. And my friend who is doing it, his name is John Reichert, known on YouTube as Wade Boggs Fan. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mike. Great to be here.
Glad to have you. This is your debut on Golden
Yes.
Cardboard.
My rookie debut.
Even though, are they going to have a Topps Now card for this? I wonder.
Oh, that would be nice.
Wouldn't that be cool? You could make a Topps Now card of your own, like get a screenshot
Really?
of this, and put it on a Topps
Now
Now card.
I may have to look into that for the National. I'm looking for a design for cards to bring to the National for handouts.
Yeah, we can dual sign them.
There we go. Dual autograph. It could be the first dual autograph card given out at the National.
Actually, it wouldn't. Miko and Wesker Griff did that last year.
That's right. Back to back. They did it back to back, front and back. Yeah.
Which was actually pretty brilliant.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah, a lot of people that may not go to the National or know the YouTube community, because a lot of people are probably listening to this on podcast. A lot of us do custom cards, and I have an entire box dedicated to my YouTube family album, which includes notes and when I get care packages from people and just random acts of kindness, and then the cards that I get from all of you guys. I have yours. It's got a few dart holes in it. I'm sorry about that, but just no, not really. But John, why don't you tell everybody about what you do and what you do on YouTube, what you primarily collect really quick, and how we know each other.
Yep, sure. In a nutshell, I started off by being a Wade Boggs super collector. And so that was my focus for close to 25 years. And not going to go into all the reasons, but I wanted to go in a different direction. I wanted to not
broaden your horizons.
Not stop collecting Wade Boggs cards, but look at other stuff. And I always loved vintage cards. I had some in my collection over the years, but never really focused on it. And through your channel and through other channels, seeing all these great vintage cards you guys are collecting, I'm like, you know what? I want to get into that. I want to start building a vintage collection. So for the last close to 2 years now, I've primarily been buying more vintage than Wade Boggs cards because it's harder to find new Boggs cards or ones that aren't ridiculously priced. So yeah, even though my channel is Wade Boggs fan and it started off as doing videos showing off my Wade Boggs collection, I broadened that to doing videos about general hobby topics, how to collect this, how to do that, and also now broadening into my vintage collection. And which brings us sort of to today, and our connection. Honestly, you're probably the primary reason why I'm on YouTube.
I'm very sorry.
This was early. This was early 2000, I think, and I really didn't know there was much on YouTube for
2000, like 20 years ago.
Huh?
2000?
No, 2020. 2020. Okay. Sorry. 2020.
I was like, man, that's a lot.
Yeah, that even predates you, and I knew you've been on YouTube for a long time. No, 2020, and I didn't know there was these collector channels on YouTube, and yours was one of the first ones that I checked out, and I'm like, man, this is cool. And I saw some others. I'm like, and especially when the pandemic hit, I'm like, this could be fun. Let me just start a channel and talk about cards. And so over the years, we've connected on different things, chatted about stuff, met at the Nationals, and here we are. The start of this vintage 100 index was from one of your earlier episodes, where you talked about are vintage cards recession proof, and you took a couple cards, I forget which ones they were, but ran a few data points historically and looked at over time in different time frames what the prices did up and down. And you said, like you said, almost in passing, is this would be something that would be cool to really dive deep into the data to look at a larger group of cards and see how those cards have done over time. And when you said that, I'm like, you know what? That sounds pretty cool. Because I'm a numbers guy, and it turns out you're really a numbers guy. And number crunching, I just love spreadsheets and all that stuff. And so, I decided to, and again, I think without telling you, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this. So I did a video where I did some pre-work because I sort of had things in mind, and I just said, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing. And I laid out the 100 cards that were going to make up this index, my methodology, and this and this. And you saw my video and you're like, John, I want to collaborate. I want to work on this with you. I'm like, that's awesome. So that's where we are. That's how this whole vintage 100 index started. And hopefully we'll be able to talk about some of the things that this index is meant to be, what it's not meant to be, and then start diving into some of the initial data that we've entered.
Yeah, I think it's important to let people know that this is purely for fun, right? This means nothing in the real grand scheme of things. You can't buy the vintage 100 index. It's not an ETF that you can go buy at, at Schwab tomorrow on your trading platform or Robinhood. But it was meant, I think when I said it, it was like, just to follow the market in general. Like, what is the vintage market doing? Is it moving upwards or downwards in very general terms, right? That was kind of the idea. But I knew that to know that would require somebody to do a crap ton of work. And how do you pick the cards? People are going to bid, and we're going to talk through that here in a second. Yep. But I want you guys to know that this is far from perfect, and it's not meant to mean anything other than, hey, this is what John and I think. Mostly John, with small input from me of what we think about this, to just give us an idea of where is the vintage market going, because it's very, very different than the overall sports card market, and especially the modern sports card market, where prices are primarily driven by player performance, player injuries,
trades,
stuff that's happening in the moment.
Yep.
Trades, sure. Yeah, you bet. Free agency, all that kind of stuff can change. Championships, all that changes. The modern market has zero effect on the vintage market because those players' stories have already been told. And so there are very little things, getting inducted in the Hall of Fame, obviously, dying. Those are things that can affect vintage player prices, but a lot of, moments, so to speak, that can create volatility there. The only thing that creates volatility in the vintage market is higher demand, right?
Yep.
So let's just get into this. John has created a, what's the word I want to use? That thing.
Slideshow, PowerPoint.
Yeah, PowerPoint. We know this is a podcast, guys. So if you're listening on podcast and you don't want to go check out the YouTube video, we'll do. And if you're watching the YouTube video, we're going to explain maybe a little more than what's obviously in front of you that you can read, but it's meant to help our podcast listeners so they know what we're talking about. And maybe I'll ask these questions to you, John, and you can answer them in how you thought through this. I want to say how we thought through this, but the reality is you did a lion's share of this. I just think we think alike. So I was probably thinking about it the same way you did. And so my answer will be, yep, I agree. But we already talked about how the vintage index came about. Maybe some of the methodology you used. Let's talk first about how you chose the 100 cards that are in this index.
Well, first starting off with 100, could I have gone with 50 or more than 100? Well, again, I knew the more cards I had as part of the index, the more work and the more data. So I wanted to keep something that was reasonable, that we could continue on a monthly basis and not be too onerous to update. And I thought 100 is a nice round number. Again, hopefully it gives a large enough sample size. But again, it's not going to be perfect, but I think it was better than 50. So how did I go about? So I'm like, okay, I got to pick 100 cards. So I know it may have been that same podcast, or it may have been another one. You did something about what are the most expensive
that was another one.
rookie cards or something like that. And you had the list of these vintage players, tops rookies. So I started actually through that list. And again, I wanted to focus it between 1948 and 1980. And what Hall of Fame rookie cards fell into that group. Now it went beyond tops. So we have a Bowman. I didn't include any Leaf, the 48 Leaf. But through the rookie cards of the Hall of Famers, I got to about 80 so. And I'm like, okay, I still need a few more to make up this index. So then I said, okay, there's some players out there that may not be in the Hall of Fame, but a lot of fans, collectors think they should be in the Hall of Fame. So I went with a Pete Rose, a Thurman Munson, personal favorite, Dwight Evans, those types of players. Then I still had a few cards to fill in, just a few. And so I said, what are some of the quote unquote iconic vintage cards? So I included the 71 Topps Munson, the 53 Bowman Pee Wee Reese. I threw
in 54 Bowman Ted Williams.
Yes. And some second year cards of players that had their rookie card was a multiplayer, and maybe I know there's a lot of interest in those second-year cards like the 69 Ryan, 68 Seaver, the 64 Topps Rose, that to some collectors, they may even prefer more than their rookie card. So that got me to right around 100. So I'm like, okay, so I got the players. Then there's two more things, like where was I going to get the data? And that's where our collaboration came in. And we decided to go with vintage card prices. That website, rather than trying to do eBay sales, listings, or other things like that. And for all these data points, if there are multiple sales of a card within a given month, we went with the most recent. So again, we tried to make this less onerous as possible and we weren't going to try to do some average for the month. If 3 sold, take an average of those 3. We said, look, let's just go with the last card for that month sold, whatever the price is, we enter it. And we did, I think there was 4,200 entries that we did. We took the data back to January of 2019.
Technically December 31st of 2018, but yes.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And the other thing that we had to figure out, or that I figured out, was what grade to use for the particular card. Now,
why
I
use
know
graded cards at all?
What?
Why use graded cards at all?
Oh, well, again, graded cards.
And I know the answer, but I think it's important to explain it. Yeah.
Very good. Graded cards, whether you like them or not, at least have a general understanding within the hobby of what a particular grade would sell for, and it's identifiable. Raw cards, you get it's a lot more subjective to the eye, and in our case, in looking up data, just because a listing says, hey, it's a 64 Topps Pete Rose in an excellent mint condition, is it? And depending on how well the pictures are, someone may get a steal when it's a really nice looking card because it's a bad picture. There's so many other variables that come into play when you're dealing with raw. So we went with vintage.
You went with graded, you mean?
Yes, we went with graded.
Yeah, and I think it's go ahead and finish, and I'll tell some other points that we thought about.
So in terms of the grade itself, I got comments on my initial video of, well, geez, well, sure, this card and that grade, well, us normal collectors can't afford that card. And that's not what we're looking to do. So again, to try to give some semblance of consistency, I went with the collector grade. So the collector grade, for those on the podcast and stuff, is that if you have a card from the 1940s, a collector grade would be a PSA 4. A card from the 60s would be a PSA 6. So based on what the card was within the index, it would either be priced at a PSA 4 level, 5, 6, 7, or in the case of the 1980 card, in a PSA 8.
Yeah, and I think that's really smart, just to pick not the high end, because that's not what we're trying to measure, the general market, right? Mm-hmm. And finding collector grade examples of these cards is reasonably common. The older you get, the less likely you're going to find higher end versions. So you kind of step down grades as you get older and older. It only makes sense, right? There's just fewer higher grade copies. And I think I wanted to explain why we use the last sale of each month, each given month, why that's important, because we talked about this as we were trying to go, okay, we have the data. What do we want to actually use for the data? And the reality is, just like any stock in any given day, there's an intraday, the stock can move up or down in the middle of a day, but what really people mostly care about typically when they look at their statement is what's the closing price, right, of that day, regardless of what volatility occurred during the day. Mm-hmm. We expanded that in our thought process of, well, a card can vary greatly in any given month. Where did it end the month? What was the last sale of that month? It's not, and it's certainly on a lot of these, we found not on the 31st. There might have only been 4 or 5 sales of that card in that grade in a month, and the last one might have been on the 14th or
Yep.
something weird. That just is what it is, some cards are just more tradable, there's just more of them, and they go through the market faster. We call that velocity, by the way, in the stock world. But some cards don't have a lot of velocity, honestly. But that was the rationale for that. And I think, again, there's no perfect way to do this. The most accurate way would be to average all the sales, and like you said, but good God, who wants to do those points of data?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to distinguish. We all know that a PSA 5, and we used PSA, by the way, not any other grading company, just so y'all know, to do this. But a PSA 5 of what's a card in the 50s? Let's say the Pee Wee Reese Bowman color, 53 Bowman color, right? All PSA 5s are not created equal, and we understand that. Okay. We simply looked at what the price was. We didn't look at the card and went, "Ooh, that's a great example of a 5." Or, we all know that people will I should say overpay. They'll
Pay a premium.
pay up for a better example of that grade, and they'll pay down for a bad example. They'll pay lower for a bad example. And we didn't factor that into our thought process. It was, what was the last sale of a PSA 5? Regardless if it was perfectly centered or off-centered, or it didn't matter. It still has a PSA 5 on the label, is what it is. Sometimes that was the highest sale of the month. Sometimes it was the lowest sale of the month. We had to draw a line somewhere, and that's what we chose.
Yep.
Again, far from perfect, but it is what it is. Why don't you talk about now, John, about what the index is meant to be, and maybe what kind of it's not meant to be?
Sure. Again, my goal, and Mike, I think your goal as well with this is just to, as you said in your intro, just an attempt to try to get some measure of where the vintage baseball card market is going. It's not perfect. It's a small little snippet of 100 cards. It's not the entire market. It's not high-end cards. It's not low-end cards. It's graded cards. It's not raw cards. So it's not going to be perfect, but it's just a way for us to see, because I think there's been a lot of channels, videos devoted to modern cards and what cards are hot, what cards are not. Where's this player's cards going, and all this stuff. Not that we want to try to duplicate that. All right. But it's just meant for educational purposes, for our enjoyment. Honestly, this is Mike and I's little project to have fun with, two guys that just love to crunch numbers, and for us to discuss the stuff. And does it mean that, oh, well, all vintage cards are going this way? No. Does it mean that different cards, I'm trying to get the last thought in terms of it's just a fun exercise. I don't know how it's more important, like what not, like what this index is not meant to be, to try to explain what it is meant to be. I know that's a sort of a circular reference there, but we're not saying to those who follow this that, hey, these are the best 100 vintage cards. No, it's not a top 100 list. It's not cards that we're telling you should have in your collection. And this is not investment advice. So if we're talking about a card or the index in itself saying, hey, boy, this card's going up X% so far in 2022, we're not telling you to go out and buy that card because we think it's going to continue to go up. So there's no investment side to this. It's us just looking at data and seeing some stuff that looks interesting to us and discussing it, I guess, is the best way to put it. You may have some additional thoughts, Mike.
Yeah. No, I agree with everything you said. We're reporting the data. Take and use it for however you want. is probably the best caveat I would give you. We might provide our own opinions on pieces of data that we think is interesting, but that doesn't mean in any way that we advocate for or against anything. It's just, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that happened? Whatever, and maybe give some reasoning, but not a prediction of the future, nor
right. Well, Mike, you mentioned in your, I think maybe before I came on, or just when I came on, you said things that may affect vintage cards. Well, election to Hall of Fame, or Hall of Famer passing, or things like that. That may be something where it would be interesting just to see, again, not as advice to buy or whatever, but where did that player's card, did that particular card see a spike after they made it to the Hall of Fame? How long did that spike last? Was it a 2 or 3 month bump and then it came back down? Just to see how some of these cards act over time.
Yeah. As CNC Music Factories used to say, things that make you go, right?
Yes.
So let's move on to the next, unless you have anything else to run over with that.
No, okay. I'm good.
So talk about this slide and what it is for the podcast.
Sure. This is the first initial look at the data. And the index, I should say that the index started, and I should have that number here. It started, I think, around 500, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, just right around 500 back in, it'd be December of 18's data, but January of 2019. So that's sort of the base.
I think it's important to clarify. So let me explain this real quick, because super important for you to understand what that index number even means.
That's true.
We took the card at the particular collector grade, ending price of the month, and put it in for all these 100 cards. Added it up, that's the total. Divided it by 100, that's your index. So it's basically the average price, essentially, of all 100 of those cards in that particular month. So if you did the quick math, the index at the this is May 31st, essentially June 1st, right? Was it 1259? So, or 1260, essentially. You could say times 100, it would cost me $126,000 to buy all of the cards in the index at that grade. Right? That's essentially what you could do. And so that it is price weighted, meaning that higher price cards have a larger effect on the index than lower price cards. If the Mantle rookie, which is in there, 51 Bowman, if it goes up $1,000, that's going to have them, which isn't a big price move for that card, but it matters on the index because the Dwight Evans rookie is not going to move $1,000. The Dwight Evans might go up in a larger percentage. But that will affect the index less because it's not, from a dollar standpoint, that big of a move. So it's a price weighted index. For those of you that know what that is, that's what this is. And it weights more to the higher price cards.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but for the stock market, when you have certain indexes, there are stocks that may trade at a higher volume or a higher price, and some others that still make up the index, correct? So this isn't unique.
No, it's not. The S&P 500, I think, is price weighted. The Dow is cap weighted, because you can have cap weighted too. Like, how big is the company? Like, how much value do they add overall? Price times number of shares. This is not cap weighted. It is price weighted. So again, the higher price cards affect the index more on any given significant movements. So, but that still doesn't mean it doesn't tell a good story. Again, you have to draw a line somewhere on the data. Like, you have to pick something. You can't do it all different ways. You just, okay, we like this. If somebody else has a better way to do it, knock yourself out, right? There's no copyright infringement here on our end, but so keep going, John. I'm sorry.
Sure. No. So that was a very good introduction and explanation of the number. So as Mike said, the index for June of 22 was just under 1260. Now compare that to where the index was in May which was 1315, the index itself was down a little over 4%. So cards, now again, maybe more some than others, but there was a drop of 4% on the average, which is the index of those 100 cards. And since January of this year, so year to date, it's down almost 1%. So I know a lot of people are talking about vintage cards. They're starting to soften. They're starting to, prices are starting to go down on some cards. This data sort of goes along with people's perceptions of where vintage cards are going right now. So on a month-by-month basis, we saw a 4% dip, and year-to-date almost a 1% dip.
Yeah, I would say year to date it's pretty flat, right? I mean,
Yeah.
1% is not a huge move,
Nope.
one way or another on 100 cards, right? I mean, that's so far this year, vintage has stayed pretty consistent. Although you'll see month to month moves. If you look over the 6 months, though, or I guess technically 5 months, it is pretty flat, which is cool.
Yep. And just to give some perspective, since we started at the beginning of the data, again in January of 19, which is December of 18's data, it was right around 501 and change was the index. And now at 1,260, that's 151% change in 2.5 years? 19, 20, 20, no, 3.5.
3.5 years, yeah.
Yeah, 19, 20, 21, and then half of 22. So in 3.5 years, this index, the average value of those 100 cards has gone up 151%. So despite any pandemic boom and bust, over time, vintage still, at least for the cards that make up this index, have gone up fairly decently over a 3.5 year period.
That's an average annual return, just so people know, of 43%. Which is pretty good. I'd take that on a lot of my investments. Not that cards are supposed to be an investment; it's a hobby. But sorry, I digress.
No, and then the last, just two data points. Just again, this vintage index keeps me thinking of the stock market and certain indexes, and they always report a 52-week high and a 52-week low. So I took a look at the lowest point of the index, and that was 458, reached in April of 2019. And the index reached a peak of almost 1739 in April of 2021. So right in the heart of the second year of the pandemic, stimulus money. I mean, we can have a whole discussion, and other people have had discussion during that time period of, why are card prices going up and so on. This index hit a high in April of 2021.
Okay. Which, oh, by the way, we're down 27.5% from that high currently. So that's how much, we use the word retracement, has been there. Here's the data charted out. We have this. So if you're listening on podcasts, this will mean nothing to you. We have done a chart of this. I say we, John has done a chart from the inception of the data, again, 12/31/2018 through May 31st, June 1st. And this tells an amazing story. So if you're not looking at this, go find the YouTube video, Bench Clear Media, go find it, Vintage 100 Index. This is a cool looking chart. What do you think, John?
Yeah, it shows, and in my mind, even before I started seriously collecting vintage cards, I had vintage cards. I always liked them. My thought and idea of vintage cards was ones, generally speaking, that you held on to them. Yeah, over time they would slowly go up in value, but not have the large fluctuations of modern cards. and again, modern cards have a different collector mentality, as you mentioned. It's all about what the player's doing now and all the things affecting those players. Um, Vintage, their stories, like you said, have been written. There's very little that changes with interest in a Mickey Mantle card or a Jackie Robinson card, or you name it. And so my thought process was, hey, over time, yeah, do vintage cards go up? Yes, but it's probably slowly. And that's what this chart shows for most of 2019 and even for most of 2020. Now, when you get toward the end of 2020, I think that's where we start seeing some pretty good rise in prices. And then 2021 is just a roller coaster, in which I think by early 2021, that buildup of stimulus money, where to put money, what to buy, people coming into the hobby, you name it, all the stuff that many people have talked about, of how the hobby's been affected during the pandemic, really shows in this graph. And the jump from February to March and even April is pretty phenomenal. And then there's a almost quickly rebound. And so it doesn't stay up there for a while. It reaches a high, then just comes back down over the next 4 or 5 months. But then it sort of looks like it's back into a, if you want to use the term, a new normal. Now it's a higher new normal, and we're seeing maybe a little bit more volatility, but it's back to, like you said, for so far since January through June of 2022, the index is essentially unchanged. Now, month to month, there have been some ups and downs, but the talk of the vintage card market is going to be crashing. There's good those cards aren't going to be worth half of what they're going to be in a year or so. I'm not, at least according to this data and what we've seen so far, there isn't that doom and gloom that I see.
Yeah. I think it's important when we look at data, any data, data is only as good as interpreting it and drawing and using it. If you have just data for data's sake, that's no point. There's no way. Okay, great. You have a lot of points of data. What story is that data telling you? And does it affect your decisions? And we can, like you said, a lot of people talked about the vintage market, myself included, for a long time as that general theory of it just kind of keeps going up slow and steady. It doesn't do a whole lot of price spikes and price gouging and all that kind of stuff. And we only knew those conclusions. We only drew those conclusions through observation.
Yep.
Right. So you can draw a conclusion through observation. You can draw a conclusion through data. And I think what's best is when those can both come together to tell a story, because then you get a more complete picture of the story, not just from one perspective of the data or one perspective of observation. And so just because I think cards are doing that doesn't mean they are. And the data can either confirm or refute that observation. And then they work really well together. So I think this kind of confirms. Now, I think it's important that people, because some people are probably asking, why didn't you go further back? Well, I don't know that I trust the data much further back, honestly. VCP, although a great resource and does have data going back decades on some cards, like a really long time, first of all, it would have been almost, like you use the word onerous, John. It doesn't mean that maybe we won't start adding months going backwards when we kind of have time to do it. This was just kind of a jumping off point. But the reality is, I don't know. Maybe it'll tell a different story. Maybe it won't. That's what the data, you don't know till you put the data in. But
yeah, well, I think we went, we wanted to go at least a year before the pandemic. So 2019 was good to show that was a quote unquote, if you want to call it, a normal year.
Right.
Then the pandemic hit in early 2020. So what happened? We wanted to see what changes happened in 2020 and especially 2021. And now that we're in 2022. So I think that was the at least in our mind, the initial cutoff was, let's just go back a year, see how it was the year before the pandemic.
Right. And as you can see, if you're looking at the chart, how pretty stable that was for 2019,
Yeah.
and some small increases and different things. And the run up in 2020, I think, is important because it didn't happen in the same vein as the modern spike. If you were to do a modern version of this, I bet you would see, again, this is drawing a conclusion from observation, not from data, but you would see the spike moved further to the left on the chart,
Yes.
further earlier in time. And we all said, I said it, I know I said it, vintage is coming. Its time is coming, because people are going to get tired of the modern world and go, man, I just want something that's a little more steady. And that caused higher demand in vintage. And we saw that really manifest itself in the first few months of 2021. And like you said, reset to a new normal. And that's not abnormal for any market.
Yep.
Right? For peaks to happen, irrational exuberance happens, it comes back down, and usually not lower than it was before,
Mhm.
and now it's reset to this new level of quote unquote normal. I'm going to move on to the next chart just for time's sake, but
Yes.
hopefully you guys are enjoying this, and this, I mean, seeing the data was very visually powerful for me. When John showed me, I was like, wow, okay.
Before
Now
you get
that
to the
makes,
next, yeah. Okay. I was going to say,
oh,
before you get to the next video, I wanted to sort of lead into it.
set it up.
Yeah, and
You want
set
to
it
set it
up.
up the
And
next
that the big spike that happened between February, March, and April, and then
right here.
the dip.
Yeah.
I started looking at that the monthly change, like what cards, or multiple cards, what happened. I was just looking at the raw data, and I noticed that there were 4 cards primarily. And again, this is a price weighted index. That there were 4 cards that sort of really impacted the spike and then initial drop in the index. And it was the 49 Bowman Jackie Robinson, the 51 Bowman Mantle and Mays, and the 54 Tops Hank Aaron. So what
So
I
key
decided
rookie
to do,
cards,
what?
very
Yes,
key rookie cards. Yeah,
yes. And again, in fives, those command pretty decent prices. Or 4 for the Robinson. But
sure.
so what I decided to do is, okay, let me normalize, and that may not be the right term. Let me normalize those 4 cards. In other words, I took the value of those 4 cards, that what they were in February. All right. And I kept the prices of those 4 cards the same all the way through July, which is almost at the bottom of the drop from the peak. And I wanted to see essentially what the other 96 cards in the index did. Was there still a pretty good spike and a drop and so on, maybe just not as exaggerated because of those 4 cards? And this leads to the next chart. Now, I found that completely fascinating.
Yes.
Because if you take away those 4 cards, and you had in particular, the 51 Bowman Mantle shot from, it was like 18, I'm going to say 18,000. No, it was 16,000 to 40,000 to 52,000 in 2 months. All right. Now that's come back down a little bit. But here, what this is saying is there essentially was no bubble in terms of the 96 card. Again, it's a small sample, but this data shows I don't say a completely different picture, but this one shows a run up and a somewhat steady run up and no peak and drop. Just a steady increase in prices of vintage cards at a greater rate of increase than, say, in 2019. It's been exaggerated or multiplied, but there's been no boom and crash, again, based on those remaining 96. Now, my methodology may have been flawed. Some mathematician or statistician may say, John, yeah, you can't do that. I don't know. I did it anyway. So
I think it's fascinating. I'm
yeah.
going to scroll quickly for those watching on video
Yep.
between the two slides, because you'll see with the 4, without the 4, with the 4, without the 4. Now, like you said, on like the S&P, you can't take out Netflix and Amazon
Yep.
and, you know, the high movers, the big shakers, right? That
Yep.
significantly move the index. It's not fair. They're in the index, right? So you can't
Yes.
exclude them. But it's interesting to, when you look at this, like that's pretty interesting. I think the conclusion you can draw from that with the data is, you know, that otherwise the market's pretty stable.
Yeah.
You know, you had some really high demand cards, super critical rookies that were just, if you think about somebody coming into the hobby and wanting to get all excited about the sports card world, they're going to gravitate first to those super key cards, Aaron
Yep.
rookie, Jackie, you know, all these things. It just makes sense. Those
Yeah.
would get driven up faster by an influx of people into the hobby and money coming into the hobby, etc.
Yeah.
They're going
No,
to go,
no,
well,
no, no one's
just give
going to
me the
say,
best card.
I want a Carlton Fisk rookie card. You know, I'm
Right.
new to the hobby. I want to throw some money in here. I want to make some money on vintage cards. Nothing against Carlton Fisk. I love Carlton Fisk, but no one's going to be pumping Carlton Fisk rookie cards. You know, it's so, yeah.
It makes sense. So that's,
Yep.
I was going to say that's kind of phallic looking. But I'm not going to say that. Oh, wait, I just did say that. Okay. Like, whoop. Wife walks in the room. Wife leaves. Wife walks in. No, sorry. All right. Enough 12-year-old jokes. All right.
Yes.
So I think this is interesting that you've pulled out some of these kind of just for the month of May.
Yep.
Is really what this data is. It's as of June 1st. So this is the most recent data that we've put into the, when we'll keep adding to this, by the way. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. This isn't a static thing that here it is, guys. And I hope you liked it and you'll never see it again. And we'll explain that towards the end. So stay tuned for that.
Yep.
What the top 10, I'm going to name them. And then John, you can maybe say something that surprised you. Let's say one card that surprised you.
Yep.
And one card that doesn't surprise you. 60 Tops Jim Cat was the top performer for May, up 74%. And we're going to use percentages mostly because the dollar values are certainly important, no doubt. But I think the percentage increase is something we can all relate to. You know, it went from $143 to $249, so it went up $100. Is that the end of the world for most people? No. But it's just interesting to say it in percentages. It just sounds cooler, right? So 60 Tops Jim Cott, sorry, 74%. 58 Tops Orlando Cepeda, 68%. Then you have Andre Dawson rookie, Minnie Minoso rookie, 52 Tops, both up in the 40s. The Satchel Paige Bowman rookie, up 36%. Mantle, 56. 59 Tops Bob Gibson, both up around 30%. The Johnny Bench rookie, which I have always thought is a very undervalued card, up 25%. The Ron Santo up 20%, and then the Bill Mazeroski. So what stands out to you from this, John?
To me, it's a lack of some of the bigger name rookie cards.
Yep.
You know, you see the Bill Mazeroski, the Ron Santo, Andre Dawson, Orlando Cepeda, not. I mean, again, these are all great players, and I don't want to downgrade them. But in terms of the hobby interest, I'm. It was interesting to see those cards make the top 10 list, and not the Koufax rookie, Clemente rookie. You know, some of the other ones where you would think that there'd be more hobby interest in, more movement, and maybe the movement is just not up for those particular cards. Bowman Satchel Paige, I note in the later set of data that we'll look at, seems to be performing very well. I think has always been a fan favorite for vintage collectors. I know I'd love to own a 49 Bowman Satchel Paige, but Yeah, that's sort of my initial take. Some of the lesser known players' rookie cards making the top 10 list.
I'll tell you what it tells me. It's that this is more, May was more of a collector type month, meaning only true real vintage collectors are going to know a lot of these names. Your average investor flipper dude isn't going to know who Andre Dawson is or care, right? They might know who he is, but it's a $50 card. Who cares? You know, I'm not even going to waste my time. But the collector mindset is maybe going, I need to fill in some of these gaps while I can.
I was one of them. I needed the 77 Dawson.
Yep. You're like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and get this now because it's not unreasonable relative to other cards. So there's just, I think, a greater collector demand. And that's, I think, what this tells us.
Yeah.
By the way, feel free to disagree with any of our conclusions.
Absolutely.
We're not saying we have all this figured out. We're looking at the data. That's what's great about data is someone else might look at this and go, you know, I think it means this. And I love that feedback / what's the word I want to use? Interpretation, right?
Yeah.
Tell me what you think. I may agree or disagree with you. You may agree or disagree with John and I, but it's great to have. It's kind of fun to have the discussion. I mean, if we didn't have the data, we couldn't even talk about it.
All we're doing is showing numbers. I mean, really, that's all it is. And what we think one number versus another number means. And different people could have different thoughts and may bring up something like, wow, you know what? Yeah, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. I mean, Jim Cott, Minnie Minoso, 2 new Hall of Famers. So that makes some sense that there'd be higher demand for their rookie cards in decent grades. So that, you know, you can go, yeah, that makes some sense. Although they were announced in January, it's neat to see that even, you know, several months later, it tells that Hall of Fame election hangover can last longer than maybe people think. It's always been thought before, this is by observation, the conclusion was, it only lasts a couple months and their cards kind of come back to where they were, right? This is saying not necessarily. Let me go to the next one. This will be worst monthly performers for the month of May. I'm going to go through these really quick. You saw number 1, Reggie Jackson's rookie in the month of May was down 45%. The Killebrew rookie, 55 tops, down 40%. Then you go down the list, Eddie Murray, Jack Morris, Rod Carew, Phil Niekro, the 58 tops, Roger Maris, which I think is a great inclusion by you in the index, by the way. Kudos to you for that.
Thanks.
The Gossage, the Palmer, and Fisk rookies, all down 30 to 35%-ish in the month of May. Anything stand out to you here with this data?
Again, getting to the point that a lot of these cards are not ones that would be on the radar for investors, flippers, ones newly coming into maybe the vintage market that want to get into vintage. These may not be the household names that they're looking to do. So I'm slightly at a loss, although I do have a comment about the Killebrew. And you'll see that in, I think, maybe the next slide. So for the month of May, essentially, the Killebrew rookie was down 40%. But wait till you get to the next slide and see where Killebrew makes the list. So I'll hold off on that.
Okay.
But again, we have smaller cards. You know, Jack Morris, I think, may be one of the cheapest Hall of Fame rookie cards in the index.
Yeah, I think it is the cheapest.
But we have, you know, some players that I think for most collectors may fall under the radar in terms of their. We've talked about this before. Their impact to the sport and their records and all that stuff versus their popularity within the hobby. So you got Rod Carew, great player, not on everyone's must-have list. You got Phil Niekro, Jim Palmer, Carlton Fisk, to some extent, Rich Gossage. Great players, maybe not as great of a following in from a collector standpoint. So why the drop here? Maybe some of those cards got a little bit too excited, too bought up, and they're just seeing maybe a little correction. Like I said, I think you'll see with the Harmon Killer Brew coming up.
Yeah, baseball good does not equal hobby good.
Yeah.
Right. And that's okay. It's great for me because it just means stuff gets cheaper, so that's fine.
Yep.
Let me go to the next slide. So you mentioned the Killer Brew. Here we've got top year-to-date performance. So that was a 1 month look, like what happened in the last, in the month of May 2022. So far, year-to-date in 2022, you start off with the Monty Irvin rookie, which in this case is the 51 Bowman. He does have a 51 tops. Monty Irvin does, but the reality is the Bowman's just kind of a more popular card. So that's what John included in the index. 212% year to date. So if you had a Bowman rookie, Monty Irvin, at the beginning of the year, you're 2.1%, 2.1 times more valuable than it was then. So good job. Good on you for buying that when you did. Yeah. The Jim Rice rookie up almost 200%. Gil Hodges, 100%, which makes sense. He was elected in the Hall of Fame this year, right? So that totally makes some sense. Jack Morris, Andre Dawson. So the cards we just mentioned that were quote unquote down the most in the month of May.
Yes.
And I think maybe that's the conclusion you're going to draw, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Is they're still on this list of the most up since. And again, it can be kind of deceiving. I mean, you look at the Jack Morris, you're like, okay, it went from $11.50 to $20.
Yeah, I know.
It is 73%, but it's $8.
Right.
I mean, you're like,
yeah, I know. So it technically makes the list, but you're right. It's a percentage based. You have to draw some lines, but you say, okay, clearly that is not moving much. Someone just the change in prices there, the dollar value is somewhat meaningless, but
it is.
Yeah.
Not on the bigger cards. I mean,
right.
But in terms of price, but so that's a cool list. The Killer Brew made it, even though it was down second most in the month of May, it's still up 39% for the year, which is the 10th.
So
tied for
that
10th.
and I think there was the again the Dawson, the Morris, which is my surprisers are the Jim Rice rookie. Now again, percentage wise, I mean, it went from $28 to $82. I mean, that's I'm at a loss to maybe understand. I haven't heard anything about Jim Rice. There hasn't been anything in the. I mean, he's already in the Hall of Fame. Nothing's happened yet. There was seemingly a big run on his card so far in 22, his rookie card in 2022, and I don't know why. Maybe some of those that are listening here or watching the video may have some idea of why Rice is becoming maybe slightly more popular. His cards are going up a little bit. But going back to the Killer Brew, it's interesting that he had that 1 month decline, but again, was it because his cards have been going up at a fairly maybe too high of a pace in 2022? Still doing well, almost 39% for the year, but was just like, hey, it's getting a bit too high. I'm not going to pay that much for it, and it's just gone down a little bit. So that's my take.
Yeah. Interesting. The Irvin number one card on the list, 51 Bowman, Monty Irvin. Interesting to me. I don't know if there's been a more recent appreciation for players from the Negro Leagues that transitioned to the majors. You would think you'd see more names like that on here. I mean, the Page is on here, so that's another one, right? Satchel Paige, rookie. Yep. I don't know. That's surprising to me.
The other thing that, especially on a month-by-month basis, and you brought this up briefly, Mike, in the beginning, and so, but I want to just touch upon it again, especially for those who either also collect modern or collect modern or just looking into vintage. For modern collectors, when you're pretty much for graded cards, you're for the most part you're looking at 9s and 10s, right. And the visual difference between a 9, 10, sometimes you can't tell. You're like, oh, I thought this was going to be a 10, it's a 9. Why? maybe some small little significance that you can't tell. You could hold two of them next to each other and may not be able to tell which one's the 9 or 10.
Right.
For a vintage card, a 51 Bowman Monte Irvin, the PSA 5 is every PSA 5 is not going to look the same. You could have a well-centered copy, great eye appeal that may have led to that $750 sale at some point during 22. Again, this is for where it is now.
Well, it would have been the
Versus
end of the month, right?
Yeah. So and that 240 could have been, again, maybe earlier in the year. So there could be some price increase, general price increase. But one of these spikes could have been because maybe even the Jim Rice, maybe that is the reason the $28 copy was technically a PSA 7, but was off center and technically got the grade. And that $82 one was perfectly centered. You question, is this undergraded? It is a great example of a 7. And some collectors pay premiums for those great eye appeal cards. So that could play a part, maybe not so much in the year-to-date numbers, but definitely on the month-to-month increases or decreases. It may come down to a card selling for more because of the great eye appeal of that particular example, or that maybe the last copy didn't sell in 4 months. So
Right.
finally one hit the market. Oh, we haven't seen one in 4 months because of the market factors or whatever. There haven't been as many for sale. So that could also play a part of saying, geez, I've been looking for this card and I've been waiting. It's been 3 or 4 months since one popped up. I want to go after it. And that may push the price for that one particular card up.
And that's
A
a
lot of things could
critical
happen.
thing. That's a critical thing. You brought it up. I'm going to point this out. There were times when some of these cards in the grades we were looking at didn't sell in any given month. And
Yep.
so if that happened, we simply carried over the price from the previous month because it's just like it didn't trade. So there is no activity on the price. It's the same, really. Your
Yep.
last sale is still your last sale, even if it happened a month ago or 2 months ago. And there were some cases where there were 3 or 4 month gaps between sales,
Yep. And
that's
you
just
couldn't put
part of it.
0 because that would screw up the entire index
Absolutely.
calculation.
We just carried over the price. It just means it didn't change, but good
Yep.
or bad, it just stayed the
Yep.
same. It's still
Yep.
worth the same. Let's keep going for sake of
Yep.
time. We're already over an
Yep.
hour, and I hope
Yeah.
people are still with us and hanging around. Worst year-to-date performers, the Catfish Hunter rookie from 180 to 100. I'm just going to go over a couple of these. The worst, you can go look, you can see the data in front of you. The 50 Bowman Ted Williams is the second worst at 43% down, which is actually a much significant dollar value. It's down 1,400 to 800. So that's $600, but it's still only 43%. It's the same percentage. So if you owned, 10 Catfish Hunters, you'd be in the same boat dollar wise as if you owned one Ted Williams.
Right. Yeah.
But in terms of total dollars lost, I'm surprised the Oliva rookie is down on that one. It's number 10, given his it's counter to what we just saw about some of the other Hall of Fame inductees, right? For
Bill
2022.
Hodges and some of the other, yeah.
Right. Kind of just interesting that his happens to be down. I'm looking for that card. So if anybody, I still don't have one. That's one I need to add. So I'm going to move a little bit quicker, John. People can see it.
Yep.
So now we're at kind of I'm going to stop sharing this because we're kind of at the end of the data we wanted to show for this. My thoughts and takeaways are, man, this is just cool.
Yeah.
Will it help anybody? I don't know. Will it hurt you? No, it won't hurt you to know the data. It's just information, right? But for me, I just think it's really cool. And the fact that I have someone to share this with makes me want to do it even more. With you, John, your passion for it is infectious, and I love it. Why don't you tell everybody what's going to happen kind of going forward as we go? Because this will be the only time we talk. Well, maybe not the only time, but this is kind of the launch of this into with the data on this channel, because we wanted to reach a wider audience. That's just the truth. And we wanted more of you guys to hear about this. Hopefully more of you will watch this, and then you get to go to happen next and how we're going to continue this going forward.
Yeah. So on my channel, Wade Boggs Fan, we're going to be doing a monthly, most likely monthly. I don't know if there would be any need to do anything more than that at this point. But on my channel, we'll get together something like this and just take a look at the current monthly data, see what the trends are, that large chart that we looked at. So we're probably not going to be doing an hour long video every month on these updates. It may be just a 20-minute. Hey, let's take a look at the new numbers. Where does it show? Anything interesting? Things like that. And if there's interest, now again, it's whenever someone volunteers, you're like, okay, well, now you're doing it. But this may lead to other indexes. I mean, there may be an interest out there for people who watch this. Say, hey, that 100 index is great. It shows some cool numbers, but it may not be telling the whole picture of something. And they may say, well, what if we had an index that included, I don't know, budget cards, nothing over $1,000, or where's the high end market going? You'd mentioned that these aren't, the collector grade. What are cards doing that these big investors are coming in, pushing, buying the I do a set of videos of top 10 card sales on eBay and things like that. And some of these are in the PSA 8s and 9s and some 10 copies out there. And they're selling for several $1,000s. Now, some of those don't always come up for sale, but we could look at data. I mean, the data's out there.
Right.
That's the thing. And we could do whatever we want. It's just the time it takes to do all this data. We entered 4,200 data points to get to this point. Now each month it's just 100 new data points every month, so that's manageable. But who knows where this can go? But for now, it's just we're going to do a monthly. We'll have to figure out. There's probably not going to be a set schedule. Sometime after the month, certainly until we can add the data, that we'll go on my channel and just talk about the latest information, get some feedback from those who watch the videos, and just try to make it as entertaining as possible.
Yeah.
Just have fun with it.
We may even do some special videos along the way where we break out individual cards and look at their price history.
Yep.
Right. We've
Yep.
done some charting on that. Like, hey, let's look at the Yogi Berra. I think I know people are probably screaming at their car radio if they're listening to that, or into the abyss if they're jogging and listening to this on podcast, or if you're watching it on YouTube, you want to throw something at your television. What are the cards in it? We've mentioned several of them, as you've heard us just kind of talk through top 10s and this and that.
Yep.
That video, I will put a link in the YouTube video to John explaining which cards are in this index, because
yes,
obviously we haven't told you all of the cards in the index in this video. It's meant to hopefully tease you and go check out John's channel. Cards are there. And again, John and I will be doing update videos once a month, mainly because we love it. Right,
yeah.
John? I mean, there's no other way to say it.
That's it.
That's it. So that is it, guys. That is the official, I guess, launch and debut of the Vintage 100 Index. And we hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you will give us feedback down below what you think. If you're listening on podcast, you want to go see all the slides, go to Bench Clear Media on YouTube. You will find this. And yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for listening. Any final thoughts, John?
Now, just looking forward to this journey. And one of us forgot to bring the champagne bottle to pop open as the kickoff for this. But I think it's going to be fun, and that's the whole purpose of it. Just two guys talking about vintage baseball cards. That's it.
And it allowed you and I to connect in a fun and different way, and share different, data and cards and all, so it allowed people to connect and talking about something we love. And hey, winner, chicken dinner.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys. We will catch you guys next week for another episode of Golden Age of Cardboard. John, thanks for being here. We'll talk to you guys soon. Keep collecting.